Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in for another Employers Advantage team discussion about DEI&B. I'm Meghan, Business Operations Manager for Employers Advantage, and joining me today is Employers Advantage Senior HR Business Partner Shannon, HR Business Partner Candyce, and Talent Acquisition Team Lead Kim, who is brand new to our team. We're hearing more and more about DEI&B versus DEI. So team, what does the B in DEI&B stand for, and what does DEI&B mean?
Belonging.
And can I even tell you what the DEI means?
Yes.
Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. So we can start off with all of them.
Yes.
An acronym might be new to people in general.
Absolutely.
And when I think about belonging, I often include inclusion, but really highlighting it as a separate focus really emphasizes the importance of the feelings behind belonging. And we can talk about that further as we continue, but it really does emphasize the impact that we're trying to make with DEI initiatives.
That's right. And I came across a meme the other day that I really enjoyed. It says, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Equality is being on the party planning committee. And I thought that was a good example of course, it didn't have B for belonging, since that is a new term that's been added on.
Yeah, I actually did see the B for belonging someone else added. And I think it was you being asked to participate in the planning of the party.
Yeah.
So you're not just at the table, but you feel like you belong at the table so that you can safely express your opinions and your thoughts and be fully engaged as a whole person, not just as a part of yourself.
I also think I would add belonging as having fun at the party, because there's more feels attached to belonging. So I think feeling included then has to happen before you feel as if you belong. You know, it's a chicken or egg thing. One has to happen before the other, but I just associate belonging with more feels, which makes it even more difficult to navigate at the workplace because you don't generally associate work with feels.
I feel like there's more security in belonging. Like when you belong there, like these are my people or this is my place, you know, more so than you. Yeah, I'm included, but I'm just here. This is not where I'm meant to be.
Right.
Can I, Meghan, do you mind if I ask a question?
Go for it.
Which of the four do you think most impacts turnover?
For me personally, I think belonging. I mean, it's funny that this is the newest part of DEI&B, but I feel if you don't feel like you belong, like you said, the feels, you know, you want everything else to happen, but I think DEI equals B in a way. Because I know me personally, if I don't enjoy the work that I do and I don't enjoy the people that I work with, what is the point of me being there?
Yeah. Or even if I enjoy but don't feel that common, some kind of common thread or opportunity to share who I am, then I may stay for a time, but is that really going to be a place that I want to stay long term? And so I do think belonging has a high impact on turnover and whether or not people stay, your superstars stay long term connected to that organization.
Like
I agree. I feel like it's hard for employees to embed and invest themselves in the employer if they don't feel like they belong there.
Quiet quitting. We're hearing that more and more. Quiet quitting. Well, if you feel a sense of belonging, I feel the quitting part of that or the quiet quitting part of it, somebody's going to notice. If you do have a group that in a way belongs to each other and interacts with each other, and you have that sense of, I know what Shannon's up to, I know what Kim's up to, I know what Candyce is up to, then you're going to notice if there's a change. In
they should recognize the withdrawal and the lack of,
It's almost like if you do not honor any of these things, then turnover might happen in a year or 6 months. If you have a diverse work environment, I might stay 2 years. If you have an inclusive and equitable environment, 3 years. If I feel like I belong, 5 years, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, no, I agree, Shannon. It's almost like you prolong the stay by adding the different pieces, by respecting the different pieces. I think the belonging piece really speaks to people feeling valued and that they have a voice. So when you go back to a quiet resignation, well, did that person really feel like they had a voice?
Right.
Did they bring their whole self to work, and did they feel that connection with their teammates? Otherwise, how could you really leave quietly if you felt connected to people?
Right. No,
You really wouldn't.
at some
So
point,
that belonging, that belonging component, even if they don't feel it with the broader organization, if they felt it with their immediate team, they wouldn't be able to really do that.
Right.
So belonging certainly is important to emphasize for organizations, that feeling impact. I feel valued, I feel appreciated, I feel understood.
And how would you say you foster DEI&B in an organization? Do you have any examples of strategies that people can implement, or?
I think that you have to be flexible, but you have to have boundaries within that flexibility. So everybody can come to the party, everybody's included. You can get on the committee, but these are the boundaries that we have to stay within so that everybody feels safe.
Yeah, I think it starts from the beginning. So we talk about efforts you need to put into from a recruiting perspective to make sure that you diversify your candidate pool and that you're being very intentional and not passive from a recruiting perspective. And then I think step two is mentorship and creating an environment where you're interacting with people that are outside of your department or your group. And maybe the people who are outside of your department and group were involved in the recruiting and interviewing process, even if you won't work with them day to day. I think Kim did touch on one thing. There still have to be boundaries to feelings. You can't have this like throwdown party where people are over serving themselves and like that doesn't necessarily translate into belonging.
Right.
So it's a tricky thing to navigate, but I think it's much easier to create tangible things that result in a diverse work environment. Like these, it's not easy to do it, but there's more tangible checkbox task items. Like, did I post to diverse work job boards? Easy, tangible. And then it gets less tangible as you move throughout the different DEI&B words.
And I think part of the strategy, I agree, Shannon, there are a lot of kind of check boxes on the diversity pieces, right? And those, they have to absolutely be accomplished, but this one is a little harder. And that feedback loop between the employees and leadership, and really employees and even their peers, that loop is really important for belonging. So that communication where I ask you how you're doing and you're truthful about that, we can all take ownership of that in creating belonging in our individual teams. But then from a leadership perspective, listening to what individuals need and then looking to be flexible in the boundaries that we have, looking to be flexible and providing a suitable answer to their need. So it can't just be that we listen, we ask for feedback, and then we listen to the feedback. We then have to figure out how to take action on that feedback, action that fits within, flexible but logical, reasonable boundaries within the organization. And if we do that, then people do feel appreciated because they feel like, well, I had a need and I was not just listened to, but then there was a response to that need. I feel valued. So definitely there are a little more nuances to the belonging component, but they actually can be very fulfilling because once you teach individuals how to build those kind of connections and listen and be responsive, then it can really spread in a very positive way in an organization.
I also think like diversity is more leadership driven. And then as you move throughout the different, stages, belonging always is leadership driven, always, especially out of the gates. But then as an employee, you can have a significant impact on whether or not someone feels as if they belong, because there is a boundary between leadership and the actual employee. So I think all of a sudden then you have to step up and make certain your coworkers and your counterparts feel as if they belong. They feel as if they're participating in meetings and they feel as if they were a good participant. They contributed things that were heard and added value. So all of a sudden it shifts from leadership more, I think, to the employee and coworker.
Yeah. Because
do you agree? Is that,
I agree.
Okay.
Because if you have a quiet employee or a quiet team member who doesn't speak up as much, and then you have one that's dominating a conversation or poo-poos their ideas all the time, then they're not going to speak up. And then you don't have, I mean, to me, everyone should be able to speak up, because you never know when a great idea is going to come along just by having a conversation and a way to make things better. So I think you're absolutely right. While it's leadership driven, I think employees, just helping employees really makes belonging in a team.
But I think that it's important that employees recognize that it has to be an all hands on deck type initiative. It's driven by the leadership and by the organization, but it really has to be something that everybody's driving internally.
Yes, for sure. I definitely believe the systemic components of belonging have to be addressed by the leadership team. And so I certainly, and probably you have too, been on teams that I loved. I loved the team. I felt like I belonged on the team and was valued on the team. But when I left my immediate bubble above that, that wasn't the feeling that I got from the overall organization. So it really didn't, I was retained for a time, but I wouldn't be retained for a long period of time because of the organizational systemic issues. So it has to be more than just the check boxes of diversity. And it certainly has to be the team effort between leadership really buying in and taking the initiative, and then everybody else going, yes, let's belong and let's make sure that other people feel the same.
I also think that kind of leads back to, I mentioned earlier, having people who may never work with this person on a day-to-day basis participate in the interview process, have mentors that are completely outside of this person's group. I'm in finance and my mentor's in sales, and they're not necessarily there to just mentor me on my day-to-day job. Maybe that's a separate person, but they're there to answer questions like, how do I do my timesheet? Or where's a good place to eat lunch around here? They're more of a partner. And I think that just overall creates a more inclusive work environment that gives people those good feels. So Candyce, when you leave your bubble, there's not a big difference between the other folks that you're in. You're very intentional about making sure people interact with each other, even outside of their group.
Yes, I do think that's why the B, being separate, is so important, because it really doesn't make people go, well, wait a minute, how can I be intentional about enforcing belonging and creating belonging in the organization? And as long as it's kind of tucked under the I, people miss that. So it doesn't allow for this kind of engagement that we're having today, which is awesome.
And it's not a checkbox too.
Yeah.
So, it's not, you can't just check it off.
I have another question. And Kim, you might be able to speak to this a little bit, just because you talk to so many candidates interviewing for jobs in so many different work environments. Have you ever had that person who just doesn't care whether or not they belong? They just, their thing that's most important to them is their family. They'll stay at this job forever. They just want to come in, do their job. They don't necessarily need to know what you did that weekend. They're not mean, they're not bad, but that's just their approach at work. Have you ever, whether interviewed someone or?
Yeah, you know what? Oddly enough, you really don't, or I really don't get people who really care about belonging until they maybe hit that 10-year mark in their career. So under that, it's kind of more just the hustle and bustle of proving themselves, getting the big title, getting the money. Then once they hit that 10-year mark, they're kind of like, okay, I've worked my fingers down to the bone. I've had all of that. It was great. But now I need to feel like I belong somewhere. I want to sit down. I have a whole family now. I don't want to keep, uprooting myself. It's really not until that point that they want to belong, because after that, then they hit their 20-year. Okay, they're looking for the place that they want to retire. So usually most candidates that are prior to that decade, they're not really looking to belong. They're just looking to make money, because that's all that they see in the forefront.
Or maybe they don't know yet, because they don't know what belonging feels like, right?
Or maybe they don't know. And I didn't know either, being a young professional, especially in HR, being that we're HR professionals, we feel like it's HR, like everything's going to be right because it's HR, right? Like it's going to be perfect. You can't mess up in HR, and then you get into it and you're like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's wrong. A lot is wrong, right? So, yeah, once you grow and you mature, you start to recognize, okay, you can make a lot of money and you can have a lot of titles, but do I really belong here? Is the work-life balance there for me? Is the growth potential really there for me? It's not until that point.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and work-life balance is so important. That's one thing I know. I'm maybe almost 2 decades into my career, And it's definitely something I've focused on, like you said, Kim, in the last few years, especially just belonging and that work-life balance. There's more to it than a title and money. And I think, you know, as you do grow in your career, you go, okay, what's important to me?
I think, you know, we talk about what are tangible things that employers can do. We talk about mentorship. We talk about being intentional throughout the interview process, making sure you seek candidates that provide representation for the existing employees, you know. And I also think policies that you put in place, because we talk about work-life balance, for example, you know, internally here, and I think this is becoming a little more popular. We have, you know, you can have unlimited PTO at an organization. And the reason why that might impact DEI&B is that I know now you value my family, you value my time, and you trust me. And I feel like I belong in a place where I truly feel that I'm trusted, and that my coworkers will step up and cover for me. None of this is of concern. And there's feels connected to that.
For sure.
Definitely.
Well, so I think assessing policies and saying, what can I tweak here?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Assessing policies, looking at just how your handbook reads. Does your handbook say we value diversity and inclusion and we want you to belong here? We want you to feel that. Most handbooks don't say that. And so you definitely want to represent your company and outline policies that will encourage that and even incite that for employees that don't know that that's what they even need.
I know, Candice, and this, you know, people have different opinions, necessarily how they want their handbook to read. But I know one other example is, you know, we have clients now that use plural pronouns. And it's something as simple as that might create an environment where there's more of a sense of belonging.
Definitely.
That's right.
I think something else that really needs to be paid attention to is how companies maintain DEI&B within acquisitions, because you have these acquisitions of really large organizations, and a lot of the times one was really heavy on making sure that they were inclusive, the other one may not have it at all. How do you merge that and still keep the culture alive?
I've dealt with that. I've worked with a client in the past who that was the case. Thankfully, it was equally as important to both parties. So it was actually nice to see the merger because they came to the table with different ideas. And so it was a way to revive the efforts that they were putting to DEI&B. But Kim, you're right. It can go either way.
It can. And if it doesn't go good, then it's a complete culture kill. And you'll see turnover like crazy.
Absolutely.
The biggest thing you can do as an employer is not acknowledge or pay attention to this, especially in 2022. Like, you know, that is a mistake an employer is making.
Right. Yep, absolutely.
And it's an intentional one. And so that it lets the employees know very clearly where that organization stands. And I have definitely been a part of a merger that was like that. And we were all very clear. And it created a vacuum of people leaving the organization because they understood that the new organization wasn't interested in modifying their culture to be inclusive. They wanted their culture to stay the way it was, and it was definitely a divisive decision.
Yeah, I think the irony is that the extent to which this is important, it's also equally as easy to forget and be lazy about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, usually when something's really important, like pay scale, you can't ignore it.
Right.
This is one that is equally as important and easy to ignore or forget.
Yeah. Or just to do the superficial check boxes and then the real intentional, deliberate work. Don't put energy into that.
Yeah. And superficial isn't belonging. That will never result in that. Never.
And people can tell the difference. You can tell the difference when it's like intentional and I'm thinking about it and it matters versus I'm checking a box. I have a list, I'm checking it off. So,
and I think that most employees would rather them just leave it alone and ignore it and not even check the box than to insult them and say, you know, no.
Yeah.
Like either do it or don't, because otherwise it's embarrassing. You know, it's
Yeah,
tough.
it is embarrassing.
No, it is embarrassing.
It's icky.
And definitely
Let's be
don't
real.
waste the time asking the question if you're not willing to do anything with the answers that your employees provide you.
Completely.
Right.
If you know you're not going to do anything, to just stay in that dormant state. Definitely don't ask the question.
Like you
Yeah.
said earlier, employees are looking for people to be responsive. Like if you're not going to be responsive, just keep asking.
It's a waste of time, waste of everybody.
Yeah, I always think if you're sending out a survey and you don't know what you're doing with those results, then don't send the survey.
Absolutely.
Don't send the survey.
If the results are directly going to a project manager so that we can start.
Completely. Yes. Yeah. Don't send it. Don't send it. Anyway.
No. All right. Well, on that note, thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Shannon, Kim, and Candice. This was another great discussion, and we appreciate everyone's time. And thank you for tuning in.